Hello, and welcome to our Wednesday workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about targeted questioning. So, here's why self report doesn't work it's because of social status, knowing what you don't know, and it's reinforced behavior. So, you probably have experienced times in class when you have a natural break in the material that you're presenting and when you need or feel like you want to move on to the next topic or the next idea. And so, one of the things that we naturally do before transitioning is to kind of check for understanding. The problem with that is that we normally ask questions like, are there any questions? Do you get it? Any concerns? But here's the thing, when we talk about social status, we're asking kids to take an enormous risk to step up in front of their peers and say, actually, no, I don't get that. I'm really confused or I don't understand. Because that puts a big target on them as uh, potentially feeling dumb or not good enough or set up for ridicule. So a lot of times if students do have questions or if they are unsure about what they're supposed to do, they're not going to self-advocate because they're concerned about what that's going to mean for their peers and even what that's going to mean for you and whether you as the teacher are going to view them as less than or not smart enough because they didn't understand it. The other problem with self-reporting and being able to say, "Hey, I don't get this," is you have to know what you don't know. Um, if you asked me right now if I had any questions or if I had any misunderstandings about how an engine worked, I I would be at a loss to know what even to ask about. It's kind of like when you start a new job and somebody's giving you a crash course on the job and they say, well, do you have any questions? It's like, I'm sure I do. There are things that I need to know, but I don't know what I don't know yet. And so a lot of times when we ask students if they have any questions, they don't have them at that point because they haven't tried working with the material or getting started on a task or putting that lecture to use. So um, that's where it can be difficult for them to self identify where there are misconceptions because they just don't know. And then finally, it's reinforced behavior to not actually ask for help. A lot of times those, do you get it, are there any questions, are rhetorical in function, and we aren't really expecting students to have questions. It's more of like a nice little closing remark so we can move on to the next thing. And we reinforce students not asking for help when with our body language when they do ask, and I'm guilty of it. um, I'll give a short kind of snippy re-explanation and, do you get it now? um, okay, you got it. Or frustration that I feel like they didn't listen well. And so we reinforce that behavior. Um, and the other way is that we just don't give them wait time. It's like, any questions? Nope. Okay, moving on. So when we ask those questions, we're not really expecting a response, and we haven't planned for that response. And students pick up on that, and they figure out that you really don't want them to have questions, and so they don't. So let's watch a clip of a teacher getting feedback from students and getting an idea of what they know without asking, do you got it? Or do you have any questions?
practicing these spelling words that you've been practicing all week. At the end, we're going to vote on a scale of 1 to 4 about how confident we feel about taking our test tomorrow. So be thinking about that as you practice the words. Number 1, please wait till I say go before you take off your cap. Number 1, collision. On the freeway, there was a traffic collision. Go. You have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Pen cap on. Pen cap on. Show what you know. Iris, can you very loudly spell it out loud for us? COLLISION. Michelle quickly changed hers, so is Raina. She's quickly changing hers. Keep it up high if you got it right. Erase by the time I count to 5. 1, 2. Thank you, Jose G, for not slamming it down on your desk. Next word. Beautician. A beautician works at a salon to make people beautiful. Beautician. Go. Don't get tricked. There's lots of silent words, silent letters in this word. You have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Marker cap on. Marker cap on. Show what you know. Jose V, loud and proud, can you spell it out loud for us? Eli's holding his up high because he spelled it right. So is Natalie. Erase by the time you can tie.
Okay, so we see in that clip that she could have said, okay, we have a spelling test tomorrow. Are there any words that you have a problem with? Or are there any words you don't know how to spell? And here's the thing. When she asked the students to spell them, there were some that got them incorrect. They thought they knew how to spell it. So if she had asked, especially that kid kind of in the front of the room closest to the camera, he got both of the words incorrect and had to change it. If she would have asked him, "Hey, do you know how to spell this word?" He would have said, "Yep," because he wrote it with confidence. But then he realized that he had gotten it incorrect. And so the teacher got a lot of valuable feedback there from students on where they were and how prepared they were for that test that was coming up the next day. So be thinking about that when we are looking at checks for understanding.
We are practicing these spelling words.
So you may be saying, okay, so I can't say, do you have any questions? Or do you guys get it? Or any concerns? What am I supposed to do? And here is one possible solution. We will be looking at more moving forward, but a possible solution is targeted questioning. And so Doug Limov says this about targeted questioning. It is a quick series of carefully chosen, open ended questions directed at a strategic sample of the class and and executed in a short time period, often a minute or less. So this is something that should not be very time consuming in the classroom. So when you're delivering a lesson, we're talking about a minute or less of instructional time to check for understanding. So some things to think about when we are using targeted questioning is that speed counts. So it should take 1 minute or less, at the very most 2 minutes if you are covering a lot of material or there's a lot of broad ideas that you need to ask many questions for. But ideally, you're looking at less than a minute, and it allows for multiple checks for understanding. So instead of waiting all the way till the end of a period, or all the way till the end of all of the information that you want to cover to give a quiz or to try to get um, a check for understanding based on the work that the students produce, you're going to get those checks for understanding multiple times. So you're going to provide some information, and then you're going to stop periodically and check in with the students to see whether or not they're getting that and following um, the material. And the great thing is you're actually using less time than you would be if you were using questions like, any questions, everybody got it, can we move on, because you're going to identify and eliminate errors as they occur instead of getting all the way through and then realizing you might have to start back at the beginning because there was a misconception or a misunderstanding in the information. So one of the other things that you want to think about is that you should be planning your questions in advance. Um, and the reason for that is because you get more precise questions. So you can really think about the language that you use and the vocabulary that you use in your questioning so that you can look at really specific information that you're targeting. When you are asking questions on the fly in the classroom, and um, you haven't planned out what you want to ask the students, sometimes your questions may not be very precise or they may give away some of the answers. Or you may end up asking a question that doesn't really address where you were hoping to go. So, if you plan your questions in advance, it's also a little check for you if you've covered all of the material that you were planning to cover. It also allows you to move quickly and listen better. Um, so instead of having to think about what am I going to say next, or how am I going to phrase this so that students can understand, you already have them prepared. So you can read it, and then you don't have to be thinking about what comes next. So you actually get to really listen in to the student thinking. Even the student struggle in trying to formulate answers on their own can give you valuable information, and you can anticipate and plan for errors. Even the most amazing instruction, some students aren't going to get it. They're going to need it explained in a different way, or they're going to need some more um, context or something. Right? They're going to miss something, and a lot of times we can anticipate where a potentially problematic um, understanding might happen, and we can plan for that. So we can plan these questions, know what our expected answers are, but also anticipate, you know what, students might answer in this way. And if a student answers in this way, here's how I'm going to respond to that so that I can correct that, not only for that student, but any other students in the room or in the video chat that might be thinking along those lines as well. You also want to sample strategically. So choose from students who are showing middle, low, and high abilities. Um, get a couple from the middle, right? As you get to know your students and know how they typically perform, pick some of those middle performers, and then one or two low performing students, and then maybe one high performing student. If you can get a decent sample of the room as a whole, and think about what performance your students are generally at. You may have a classroom with really high achieving students, and so you might want to pick more high, or you might have predominantly low performance, and so you want to ask more low performing students. So think about the percentages in your class. And that gives you a pretty accurate sample of the class as a whole. So it's not completely 100% accurate, but if if you do a good sample, then you can have a really good idea of and you can make a safe assumption about what the rest of the class knows and understands as well. Okay, here's the other thing. You want to be doing cold calls. And cold calls means you are calling on people at random, not asking for volunteers. Volunteers are more likely to know the answers. And so if you only call on the kids who raise their hands or choose to unmute or choose to put the answer in the text box, then you're going to get inaccurate data because you're going to falsely assume that the rest of the class understands as well, when it might only be this small sample of students who are willing to um, volunteer the answer. And when you only call on volunteers or you allow them to put things in the chat box um, or not, right? Like it, if you know the answer, put it in the chat box. That gives permission for every other student who may not immediately know the answer or want to struggle with finding the answer. It gives them permission to just check out. Right? I'm not forced to put the answer anywhere. I'm not going to be called on unless I raise my hand or unless I volunteer. So I don't have to intellectually engage with what's going on because there's no possibility that I'm going to be called on. So we have to normalize cold calling as a daily practice. Each time you begin class, each time you log into the Google Meet, remind students, hey, I'm going to be calling on you, even if you don't volunteer, even if you don't raise your hand, even if you say, I don't know what the answer is, I'm still going to be calling on random people. So everybody needs to be ready to answer and make sure, of course, that you give them that time to answer. Um, and if you say you're going to cold call, then you have to follow through with that and not take volunteers. Um, so and that's really difficult because we really want to call on those kids who know because we want to move on to the next part of the material, but we're going to have inaccurate data if we do that. So let's look at some examples. So instead of this, okay, we've reviewed cellular structure. Is everyone clear on the differences between plant and animal cells? Right? If you ask that, it sounds great, right? Clear on the differences between plant and animal cells. Well, what does that mean? Like, do I need to know one difference between plant and animal cells? Right? Like, well, yeah, one's for plants and one's for animals. Yep, I know the differences. Um, Again, if you asked me this question, I don't know because I don't remember high school biology and or college biology. I don't remember. So, sure, I can tell you the differences. One's for plants and one's for animals. I think one's got chlorophyll, more like borophyll. Anybody catch that reference? Okay, moving on. So instead of this, try this. Okay, so let's make sure we're clear on the differences between plant and animal cells. Caleb, what does the presence of a cell wall tell me about the cell I'm looking at? Good. And what else might tell me I was looking at a plant cell, Charlene? And which cells have chloroplasts, Lucia? Yes. And why do they have them, Gabino? Good. It sounds like we're ready to move on. Okay, so if I were to ask these very targeted questions specifically to students, and they were able to answer all of them, right? And I'm assuming that I've taken a sampling of the class. We have very high performing teachers, so I did. Excuse me. We have very high performing teachers, so I did 100% high performing teachers as my examples. Um, and if they were able to answer these questions, then I can assume that the rest of the high performing teachers that we have would also be able to answer those correctly. And it would be safe to say that we're ready to move on. This also, if we were asking these questions and I was in the room and I wasn't called on, but I wasn't able to answer these questions, now I would be more able to identify where I might have some misconceptions. And so then I'd be able to self advocate better and say, wait, I forgot what chloroplasts were. Okay. Wait, I don't understand why they have them. So it gives me a better understanding as a student where my own errors might be and be able to self advocate for that. Okay, so instead of this, what was the Stamp Act and why was it important? This is a little bit better than Are We Ready to Move On? Because it is a little bit more open ended. But this, right, what was the Stamp Act? I can give you one fact, or I can, maybe explain in very short detail what I know about the Stamp Act and why it was important, right? So I can do a brief definition and one little fact about why it was important. But what that question is asking me to do is only provide what I know. It doesn't help identify what I don't know. So if you asked me that question, I could probably answer it, but you wouldn't have accurate information on how much I fully understand the Stamp Act, which is very little. Um, and how important it was and the ties that it has. So instead, let's ask these questions. Robin, what did the Stamp Act do? Good. And what governing body passed it, Quentin? That's right. How did the House of Burgesses react, Darren? I have no idea if I said that right. Sorry. Correct. And how did the governor of Virginia Colony react, Hannah? So again, I'm pinpointing the things that I as the teacher am finding important that we expressed, and I want to make sure that they have these key pieces before we move on. So let's see targeted questioning in a very short video clip.
Okay, scholars. So, today we're going to read a book called Clever Fox. The title of our book is Clever Fox. The title of our book is Clever Fox. Does anyone know what clever means? What does clever mean? What does clever mean? Kayla, do you know what clever means? No. Okay, Isaiah.
Clever means smart.
Clever means that you're really smart. Kayla, what does clever mean?
Clever means smart.
Clever means that you're smart. So looking at the front cover, what do you notice? What do you notice?
All right, so very short clip, but we saw a targeted question there. What do you think would have happened if the teacher had asked this group? What do you think would have happened if this teacher had asked the group? Does everybody know what clever is? Do you think that the girl who didn't know would have volunteered that she didn't know what it meant? Perhaps it seems like a safe and comfortable environment, but probably not, right? Especially because the rest of everybody else in the group seemed to know what it meant. Um, and so it was a very targeted question to make sure that she understood. And when she didn't, she asked another student the same targeted question, got the answer, and then again checked back in. And she didn't say, well, Hannah, do you get it now? You got it? Okay, we ready to move on? She asked the same question in the same tone. Um, right? She was showing with her language and her body language that I am okay with taking this time to ensure that you have an understanding of what we're doing. Okay, so now we can do a little reflection and practice. So think about a lesson that you are currently teaching. Maybe you're planning for, today or tomorrow, and write 4 or 5 targeted questions you could use to check for understanding. Um, but then practice them with someone to see if you can deliver them in a minute or less. Right? If the answers to the questions are take 30 seconds to a minute to even answer the questions, then maybe think about how you could break those questions down into smaller questions, but to really pinpoint and make sure that you can get a good sampling of your class and get good data on their understanding and their learning. Thank you so much. Tune in next week. We're going to continue looking at different methods to check for understanding and trying to apply that to a digital hybrid world that we are now joyfully going through. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me or contact me any way you can, and I'd be glad to help. Thanks. Have a great day.